Winston Churchill, the man who rallied a nation with his words, "We shall never surrender," the cigar, the V for victory sign, the bulldog spirit that saved Britain from Nazi invasion. But what if everything you know about Churchill is only half the story? What if behind the speeches and the ceremonies, Churchill was running something far more sophisticated? A vast intelligence network, secret financial operations, gold transfers worth billions, code-breaking facilities that changed the course of history. This is the story they don't teach you. The story of Churchill's shadow war, the hidden operations, the secret money, and the intelligence network that won World War II before a single Allied soldier landed at Normandy. Welcome to the untold history of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill valued intelligence more than perhaps any other political leader of the 20th century. From 1909, when he first became involved in creating Britain's modern intelligence system, to 1953, when he finally left office, Churchill was obsessed with knowing secrets and using them. But why? The answer lies in Churchill's personality and his understanding of power. Unlike other politicians who relied on advisors or committees, Churchill wanted direct access to raw intelligence. He didn't want summaries. He didn't want assessments filtered through bureaucrats. He wanted to see the actual intercepted messages, the actual decoded communications, the actual spy reports, and then make his own judgments. This was extraordinary. Most prime ministers delegated intelligence work to their military chiefs or intelligence directors. But Churchill insisted on being personally briefed on the most sensitive secrets every single day. When he became prime minister in May 1940, one of his first actions was to reorganize how intelligence reached him. He created a system where decoded enemy communications, what would become known as ultra-intelligence, were delivered to him in locked boxes, to which only he had the key. Not even his private secretaries knew what was inside. Churchill's personal secretary, John Colville, noted in his diary that Churchill would sit in the garden at Chequers, working and glancing at me with suspicion from time to time in the unwarranted belief that I was trying to read the contents of his special buff. Boxes. Why was Churchill so paranoid about secrecy? Because he understood something fundamental. Intelligence wins wars. Not just battles, entire wars. If you know what your enemy is planning, you can counter every move. If you can read their communications, you control the chessboard. And Churchill had access to the greatest intelligence breakthrough in history. Bletchley Park. Located 50 miles northwest of London, Bletchley Park was the nerve centre of Britain's code-breaking operation. Here, a team of mathematicians, linguists, and eccentric geniuses, including Alan Turing, worked day and night to crack German military codes, particularly the Enigma cipher used by German forces. The Germans believed Enigma was unbreakable. With millions of possible combinations, they thought their communications were completely secure. They were wrong. By mid-1941, Bletchley Park was regularly reading German Air Force, Navy, and Army communications. By 1942, they were producing 3,000 to 4,000 German decrypts per day, plus substantial Italian and Japanese intercepts. Churchill called Bletchley Park the geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled. The phrase captured everything. Bletchley produced intelligence, gold, and crucially, they kept it secret. But here's what makes Churchill's use of intelligence so remarkable. He didn't just receive it passively, he weaponized it. Churchill used ultra-intelligence to make strategic decisions that his military commanders couldn't understand. He would order ships to specific locations, or cancel planned operations, or redirect forces, all based on intelligence that he couldn't share without, revealing that Britain had broken German codes. This created enormous tension with his chiefs of staff. The military commanders found themselves constantly surprised by Churchill's decisions. He would ask questions based on intercepts they hadn't seen. He would make conclusions that contradicted their own intelligence assessments. And when they tried to push back, Churchill would override them because he had information they didn't. In March 1943, Ultra intercepts revealed that German Field Marshal Kesselring was sending 5 ships with vital supplies to North Africa. Supplies he described as decisive for the future conduct of operations. Churchill immediately ordered British forces to intercept and sink the convoy. They succeeded. But the operation was conducted without sufficient cover, and the Germans suspected a security breach. Churchill was furious. He issued a memo demanding that ultra-intelligence be used only on great occasions or when thoroughly camouflaged. He understood that protecting the source was more important than winning individual battles. If the Germans discovered that Enigma was broken, they would change their systems, and Britain would lose its greatest advantage. This was Churchill's genius, strategic patience. He was willing to sacrifice tactical victories to preserve strategic advantage. But intelligence was only half of Churchill's secret war. The other half was even more hidden: money. In June 1940, Britain faced an existential crisis. France had fallen. The British Expeditionary Force had been evacuated from Dunkirk, leaving behind most of its equipment. Nazi Germany controlled all of continental Europe, and Hitler was preparing Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. Churchill knew that if Germany invaded and captured London, the war would be over. The British government would collapse. The king would likely be evacuated. And Germany would seize Britain's most valuable asset, its gold reserves. Britain's gold wasn't just symbolic. It was the financial foundation of the British Empire. Without it, Britain couldn't buy weapons, couldn't import food, couldn't pay for the war. If Germany captured the gold, Britain would be bankrupt and defenseless. Churchill made an extraordinary decision: send Britain's entire gold reserve to Canada. The operation was called Operation Fish, and it remains one of the most secretive financial operations in history. Beginning in June 1940, the British government systematically stripped the Bank of England's vaults. Gold bullion, gold coins, negotiable securities, stock certificates, everything of value that could be moved was packed into crates and loaded onto warships. The operation was massive. In total, 1,500 tons of gold and hundreds of millions in securities were transferred. At 1,940 prices, the value was £60.90 million. In today's money, that's worth over $100 billion. The convoys crossed the Atlantic under heavy naval escort. HMS Emerald, a cruiser, carried £30 million in bullion and £200 million in securities. HMS Revenge, a battleship, led another convoy with even more treasure. The ships docked in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the gold was transferred by heavily guarded trains to Ottawa, where it was stored in the vaults of the Bank of Canada. But here's the crucial question: why Canada? Why not keep it in Britain? The answer reveals Churchill's strategic thinking. If London fell, Churchill planned to continue the war from Canada. He would evacuate the government, establish a government in exile in Montreal or Ottawa, and use the gold reserves to keep financing the war effort. It was an insurance policy, a plan for Britain's survival even if Britain itself was conquered. But Operation Fish served another purpose, one that Churchill couldn't publicly admit. It was collateral for American support. In 1940, America was officially neutral. President Franklin Roosevelt wanted to help Britain, but US law, specifically the Neutrality Acts, prohibited selling weapons to countries at war unless they paid cash up front. This was the cash and carry policy. Britain desperately needed American weapons, aircraft, ships, and supplies, but it was running out of dollars. By late 1940, Britain's dollar reserves were almost exhausted. Without cash, Britain couldn't buy from America. And without American supplies, Britain would lose the war. Churchill faced a terrible choice: use Britain's gold reserves to pay for American weapons, or conserve the gold and risk losing the war. He chose to pay. The gold transferred to Canada was then used to pay for American supplies. Ships would arrive in Canada carrying American weapons. British officials would pay for them using gold from the Canadian vaults. The weapons would then be shipped to Britain. But by early 1941, even this system was breaking down. Britain was spending gold faster than it could afford. Churchill sent increasingly desperate letters to Roosevelt, warning that Britain would soon be unable to pay for weapons. Roosevelt's solution was Lend-Lease, a program that allowed America to lend weapons to Britain without demanding immediate payment. It was, in effect, a massive credit line. America would supply Britain with weapons, and Britain would pay later after the war. Lend-Lease transformed the war. Between 1941 and 1945, America supplied Britain with $31 billion in military aid, equivalent to over $500 billion today. Aircraft, ships, tanks, food, fuel, everything Britain needed to fight. But it came at a price. Britain went into massive debt. After the war, Britain owed America enormous sums. The final payment on the Lend-Lease debt wasn't made until 20066, 1 year after the war ended. Churchill understood that Britain was mortgaging its future to survive the present, but he had no choice. Without American support, Britain would fall. And so, throughout the war, Churchill ran two parallel operations: the visible war battles, campaigns, military operations, and the invisible war, intelligence operations and secret financial transfers that made the visible war possible. While Bletchley Park cracked codes and gold flowed across the Atlantic, Churchill created another secret weapon, the Special Operations Executive, SOE. In July 1940, with France occupied and Britain isolated, Churchill issued a directive to Hugh Dalton, his Minister of Economic Warfare. Set Europe ablaze. Dalton understood. Churchill wanted sabotage, assassination, subversion, guerrilla warfare, operations so secret that even most government ministers wouldn't know about them. The SOE was born from the merger of three separate intelligence departments, creating a unified organization responsible for clandestine operations across occupied Europe and beyond. Officially, the SOE was called the Inter-Services Research Bureau. Unofficially, it was known as Churchill's Secret Army, or the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. The SOE's mission was to organize, train, and supply resistance movements in occupied countries. SOE agents, many of them women, would parachute into France, Norway, Yugoslavia, Greece, and other occupied territories. They would make contact with local resistance groups, provide training in explosives and sabotage, arrange weapons drops, and coordinate attacks on German infrastructure. The operations were extraordinarily dangerous. Captured SOE agents faced torture and execution. Many never returned. But the SOE was remarkably effective. They destroyed railway lines, blew up factories, assassinated collaborators, and fed false information to the Germans. In France alone, the SOE coordinated with 6 separate resistance networks. One of the SOE's most important contributions was financial. Few people know that the SOE was also a massive money laundering and currency procurement operation. Lord Selborne, who became Minister for Economic Warfare in 1942, stated that the SOE was the principal procurer of foreign currency in the black markets of Europe and Asia. The SOE obtained over £1.7 million worth of foreign currencies for the Bank of England, plus 700 million francs to support the D-Day landings. Why did Britain need black market currency? Because in occupied Europe, official banking channels were controlled by the Germans. If Britain wanted to pay resistance fighters, bribe officials, or purchase intelligence, it needed local currency, francs, marks, lira, that couldn't be traced. The SOE obtained this currency through black market operations, then distributed it to agents across Europe. This was financial warfare. While conventional forces fought with guns and tanks, the SOE fought with cash, forged documents, and covert operations. Churchill personally oversaw many SOE operations. He received regular briefings and approved high-risk missions. The SOE reported directly to him, bypassing normal military channels. But the SOE's existence was so secret that in 1942, 5 exiled governments formally asked Britain to create a sabotage organization and were shocked to learn that one had been operating for 2 years already. By 1944, The Allies were preparing for the largest amphibious invasion in history, D-Day. The success of the invasion depended on surprise. If the Germans knew where and when the Allies would land, they could concentrate their forces and repel the invasion. Tens of thousands of Allied soldiers would die, and the war would be prolonged for years. Churchill understood that D-Day couldn't succeed through military force alone. It required deception, making the Germans believe the invasion would come somewhere else. This led to Operation Fortitude, one of the most elaborate deception operations in history. The plan was simple but audacious. Create a fake army in southeast England, complete with fake tanks, fake aircraft, fake radio signals, and fake command structures. The fake army, supposedly led by General Patton, would make the Germans believe that the Allies would invade at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. Meanwhile, the real invasion would come at Normandy, 150 miles west. Churchill approved the operation. British intelligence used double-cross agents, German spies who had been captured and turned to feed false information back to German intelligence. And here's where ultra-intelligence became crucial. Bletchley Park intercepted German communications and confirmed that the deception was working. German commanders were moving troops to Pas-de-Calais, leaving Normandy relatively undefended. On the 6th of June 1944, Allied forces landed at Normandy. Ultra-intelligence had provided D-Day planners with precise details of every single one of the 58 German divisions in France. The Allies knew exactly where German forces were positioned, how strong they were, and how quickly they could respond. The invasion succeeded. Within weeks, Allied forces had established a foothold in France. Within months, they were liberating Paris. Within a year, Germany surrendered. Churchill later said that ultra-intelligence shortened the war by at least 2 years and saved millions of lives. Churchill's secret operations came at a cost, and not just a financial one. Throughout the war, Churchill personally handled sensitive intelligence and made financial decisions that bypassed normal government oversight. This gave him enormous power, but it also created opportunities for corruption and ethical compromises. One little-known fact: Churchill was personally broke for most of his life. Despite his wealth and status, Churchill was a chronic overspender. He lived lavishly, maintained multiple properties, and consistently spent more than he earned. By 1940, when he became Prime Minister, Churchill owed enormous debts to tailors, wine merchants, and creditors. In the middle of the war, Churchill's shirtmaker presented a bill he couldn't pay. Churchill was saved by a discreet payment amounting to nearly $375,000 in today's money from a foreign-born financier, conveyed in a check written to someone else and endorsed over to Churchill. This wasn't illegal, but it raised questions. Could a prime minister who was personally indebted to foreign financiers make impartial decisions? Churchill's defenders argue that his personal finances never influenced his political decisions. His critics point out that such arrangements would be completely unacceptable today. When the war ended in 1945, Churchill's role as war leader was celebrated. He was hailed as the man who saved Britain. Statues were erected, books were written, his speeches became legendary, but the full story of Churchill's secret war remained hidden for decades. The ultra-secret wasn't revealed until the 1970 seconds. SOE operations remained classified for even longer. Operation Fish was barely mentioned in official histories. The financial arrangements, the gold transfers, the Lend-Lease debts, the currency operations were buried in classified archives. Why the secrecy? Because revealing Churchill's intelligence operations would have exposed British methods and compromised future operations. Revealing the financial operations would have shown just how close Britain came to bankruptcy and how dependent Britain was on American support. Churchill himself understood this. In his war memoirs, he hinted at intelligence operations but never fully disclosed them. He knew that some secrets had to remain secret, even in victory. Today, historians continue to debate Churchill's legacy. Was he a hero who saved democracy? Or was he a complex, flawed figure whose decisions Bengal, famine, strategic bombing, colonial policies raise serious ethical questions? The truth is probably both. Churchill was a brilliant strategist who understood that modern warfare required intelligence, financial power, and covert operations as much as military force. He created systems Bletchley Park, the SOE, Operation Fish, that gave Britain advantages its enemies never suspected. But Churchill was also a man who operated in shadows, made compromises, kept secrets, and accumulated power in ways that would be unacceptable in modern democracies. The secret war Churchill fought wasn't just against Nazi Germany. It was a war for information, for money, for control of the narrative itself. And in that war, Churchill won. The story of Winston Churchill's secret war is ultimately a story about power and secrecy. We remember Churchill for his speeches, for his defiance, for his leadership during Britain's darkest hour, but we rarely think about the machinery that made that leadership possible, the intelligence networks that gave him information his enemies didn't have, the financial operations that kept Britain solvent when it should have been bankrupt, the covert operations that sabotaged German infrastructure and supported resistance movements across occupied Europe. Churchill understood that wars aren't just won on battlefields, they're won in code-breaking facilities, in bank vaults, in secret meetings where gold is transferred and agents are recruited. The questions that remain: how much of Britain's victory was due to military force, and how much to intelligence and financial superiority? Were Churchill's secret financial arrangements ethical, or did they compromise his independence? What secrets about Churchill's operations remain classified even today? How would modern democracies handle a leader with Churchill's level of secrecy and personal control over intelligence? These questions matter because they reveal something fundamental about leadership, power, and accountability. If you believe that history's hidden operations deserve to be exposed, if you think the stories of intelligence and secret money need to be told, then subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment. Was Churchill a hero, or was he a leader who operated with too much secrecy and too little accountability? Share this video with anyone interested in World War II, history, intelligence operations, and the hidden machinery of power. Because the greatest stories are often the ones that remain secret until someone decides to tell them. We'll see you next video, where we explore another untold history, another hidden operation. Thanks for watching.